people join us. We always have a bunch of people on Facebook joining us, but thanks for coming today. This is going to be kind of a fun class. I don't often get to bring a lot of my bottles from my fridge with me, so this will be fun to talk about some things today and teach you a little about fermentation. You know, fermentation is kind of one of those things people always go, ooh, yuck, right? Ooh, yuck. But this is the way that food was preserved for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because they didn't have refrigerators, they didn't have ways to preserve things other than drying food, but you can't necessarily dry, you know, beans and cabbage and those sorts of things. They don't really dry readily. So this is a way to preserve food. But not only did it preserve the food, it actually really increased the nutritional value of that food. I love a book called Culture Food for Health. I have the most odd, eclectic versions of books in my house. In fact, my kids joke, they're like, if you were to look in my bookcase, you would never know it was only one person because there's so many different things in there. So I have probably 6 different books on fermenting because I love it and I read them all. And this is one that's really good. It's called Cultured Food for Health. She has a really good website too. So if you want more information, this is a really good place to go. But I like her quote on here. She said, just remember, when you have an ailment of any kind, the illness is not the enemy. It's a sign from your body that it needs your help to correct something. Don't you love that? The illness is not the enemy. It's a sign that something's not working right. So why in the world does that quote have anything to do with fermenting? Well, oftentimes we talk about microbes, bacteria in particular, as really the bad guy. But they're not the bad guy. We have more bacteria in our guts than we actually have cells in our body. Pretty interesting. So they're really the good guy, but there's some bad guys that give all the rest of them a bad rap, in essence. These bacteria are actually responsible for keeping us well every day. And all this stuff's in your handout for once I actually put it in the handout, which is a miracle. These bacteria actually help us make vitamins. Isn't that interesting? So they really are our partners in staying healthy. They help us make vitamin K, a whole bunch of the Bs, folic acid, a bunch of different things. They help us absorb minerals, they help us break down toxins and they help us break down the food in our gut. So these bacteria are essential for us to actually be healthy. Without them, we're not going to be healthy. They keep us from developing food allergies. That's an interesting one as well. And they protect us from nutrient deficiencies. And you know, I talk every single day to patients all day long about nutrient deficiencies. Why do we have tooth decay? Well, tooth decay is typically because of a nutrient deficiency, and the body pulls minerals from the teeth to feed the rest of the body. Well, this may be a reason. The bacterial balance in the gut is not working properly. So a lot of people talk about fermenting as a method to help improve health. This is why, because fermentation delivers a lot of these very good, very healthy bacteria to your gut, which then helps you synthesize all these vitamins, helps you absorb minerals and nutrients, helps you to be healthier. So that's kind of the background on why we even worry about fermenting. But those people, you know, hundreds and thousands of years ago, they figured something out. Not only was this preserving their food so they could have it for longer, but it was actually helping them to stay healthier. So let's start just going through all the different kinds here. They're kind of interesting. So the first one that I have on your sheet is milk kefir. Which one is the kefir? I think this is the kefir one. The interesting thing about kefir is that it has more bacteria strains than yogurt by a long way. So a lot of people say, oh, if you have yeast problems, if you have, you know, these sorts of issues, then you ought to eat yogurt. Well, yogurt's good, but kefir has 30 to 56 strains of bacteria, while yogurt only has 7 to 10. And why do you need a lot? So let's talk first of all about why you might need to repopulate your gut with bacteria. The way I've heard it described best is if you've taken an antibiotic, and most people in our world have taken an antibiotic. Well, when you've taken an antibiotic, it's like spraying your entire front lawn with herbicide and killing the entire lawn. Everything's dead. Because an antibiotic is broad spectrum. It's killing everything in sight. Good, bad, ugly, doesn't matter. It's killing everything. So now that the lawn is dead, now that everything's kind of dead in here, would you only put one thing back in to rebuild that lawn? No, when you do grass, typically you do a seed mix. You do multiple kinds because one kind will fight off this weed, one kind will fight off this weed. So you want a bunch of different kinds because they have different functions in your gut. Same thing with the grass, you know, they have different functions. So that's the benefit of having multiple strains in whatever you're fermenting. It's a huge benefit to have 30 to 56 different strains versus just 7 to 10. Now, 7 to 10 is better than nothing, but this is even better. It's been said that I've heard studies show that one round of antibiotics will typically set you back for up to 5 years in the way the bacteria in your gut are working, in the way that your gut is functioning and your health is working. So, you know, in my world of dentistry, we talk about bacteria and infections, and we prescribe antibiotics, but I'll tell you this. Since I've started learning some of these things, I would say my antibiotic prescription rate, you know, the number of antibiotics I prescribe, has dropped from probably, 3 or 4 a week to probably not even 3 or 4 a month, probably 1 or 2 a month at most. Because I just see the detrimental side effects of killing off everything. There's other ways to do it because you have to work so hard to bring it back. So this is milk kefir. You can see on here what it looks like. So these are kefir grains. You can buy them in this form. This is a dehydrated version. I don't think you can see them because I think they're going to be in the package. But it's little lumpy things. So you can get dried, dehydrated versions. You can get live versions from a friend. If you've ever had kefir, you'll know that these multiply rapidly, and you can't find enough friends to take them. So you probably can find them from a friend if you have one. Kefir is probably the easiest thing you're ever going to do in your entire life. You put milk in a jar, you add the kefir grains to the jar, and you let them sit there. And that's all you do. And then you strain the kefir grains out, and you have kefir in your jar. I mean, if you want an easy ferment, that's it. That's all you do. It's the easiest thing you could possibly ever do. You leave it unrefrigerated for those 24 hours, and it will get thick. That's it. So kefir, super simple. Okay, so always people will ask me, well, what kind of milk? So then we have to get into the whole pasteurized versus non-pasteurized, raw, all those sorts of things. Here's my thought. The kefir grains are the things that are actually delivering the bacteria to the milk. So if you're using a pasteurized form of milk, you're still going to be able to deliver those kefir grains to that milk. So this is a way to take pasteurized milk and make it more nutritious for your body. So it's a great way to do it. What does it taste like? Have you ever had kefir from a store? I mean, it tastes like a thin yogurt, right? It really doesn't taste bad. It just kind of tastes a little tangy. It just tastes like a thin yogurt. It tastes fine. So this is a great thing to use in like a smoothie, over oatmeal, something like that. It's a really easy way to incorporate a whole bunch of bacteria. It's loaded with enzymes. I didn't even say all these good things. It provides protein, vitamin A, B, C, and K. K is a big one for us in the dental world. We're always trying to get vitamin K. Well, this is a great source of it right here. And this is the cool part. People who have issues with lactose in milk, kefir pre-digests that protein, so people who have milk problems can actually drink kefir without the same issues that they have with drinking milk. So this is really a good way to be able to utilize milk, make it more healthy, and this is a good one for kids. Throw some strawberries in there, and you're good to go. So that's the first one, kefir. The second one is yogurt. I think I do have, I don't think I have a culture for yogurt up here, but let's talk a little bit about it. Oh, there's the recipe. Add it to fresh milk, leave it for 24 hours, and then it's done. You do want to strain the kefir grains out. You'd be fine to eat them, but you want them because that's what you then use to make your next batch of kefir. So you just strain them out. So you just run it through a colander, strain them out. They look like little blobs. There is such thing as water kefir as well. So if you don't want to do any dairy product, there's water kefir. You can do water kefir grains. They look like these, but they're clear. They're kind of a clear thing. And the water kefir can be used with water. The only thing I didn't like about water kefir is you had to put a ton of sugar in it. So you had to add like 2 cups of sugar to the water along with the grains, and I just didn't like having to do that. But it works. So kefir, so you could do the water kefir. You can also do a water kefir grain with coconut water, and a lot of people like the coconut water way of doing it. So that's a great way to do kefir. This is something you can sneak into all sorts of foods. So water kefir, milk kefir, either one is easy to sneak into foods. Your kids don't even know it's there, or whomever might not like it in your home doesn't even know it's there. But it's a great way to do it. Okay, let's talk about yogurt. So yogurt's a little more familiar to everybody, right? The kids, adults, everybody knows what yogurt tastes like. Everybody knows what it's like. Again, it's less bacteria in that yogurt than in the kefir, so you're not going to have quite as many strains. But if you're going to eat it more than you're going to eat the kefir, then it's better to do it. So let's talk about how to make it. My favorite way is with a thermal cooker. So this is my favorite way to do it. The thermal cooker has an inside pan. So this pan goes right on to the stove, and you fill it with milk. Again, you can use pasteurized milk. I have made it with unpasteurized milk, and the interesting thing is it doesn't work as well long term because the unpasteurized milk has its own friendly bacteria in it, and eventually they take over. And then the bacteria that you've added for the yogurt culture aren't as strong anymore, and your yogurt gets thinner and thinner and thinner. Ask me how I know. We used to have goats, and we had goat milk, and so we'd make goat milk yogurt, and it just got thinner and thinner and thinner with each batch. But it still works great. So either you get raw or pasteurized milk is fine for that. You heat it up to 110 degrees. I forgot to bring my thermometer. This is an easy one to use. It's a candy thermometer. If you've never used one that has a little clippy thing, it just clips on the side of the pan, whatever pan you're heating it in. It doesn't have to be a thermal cooker. It can just be a regular old pan. You heat it up to 110, take it immediately off the stove. You don't want it on there longer. Then you're going to add some starter yogurt. That can simply be yogurt from the kind you bought at the store. That's all it has to be. But what I would choose to do is choose a really good kind at the store. That's the kind to go buy the $6, $7 tub of yogurt is when you're going to use that for your starter for your next yogurt. So you add that, a couple tablespoons of that to the yogurt, stir it until it's dissolved. Then if you're doing it in the thermal cooker, you take that inside pan off the stove, you pop it right in here, you put the lid down, and you don't touch it for 12 hours. If you're not going to do a thermal cooker, there's a couple other methods that it says on here and on your sheet too. So that's number one. The number two is to put it inside of a dehydrator or a warm oven. If you put it inside of a warm oven and you put it on warm, it's going to be too hot. If you put it on a temperature, it's going to be too hot. So just put it on with the oven light on. You can leave it overnight. It's super easy. The next one is if you put it into a glass bottle, like, just a glass mason jar, put it inside a cooler, then you put hot water around it. It will also the cooler will keep the water hot, and it will keep it at a sustained temperature. So that's it. All you have to do is be able to incubate basically that yogurt for 6 to 12 hours. Super easy way to turn milk into yogurt, much less expensive than buying the yogurt on your own. And this is going to be it's going to be healthier because it's going to have more strains in it than most yogurts you're going to get in the grocery store. So that's the yogurt. Now kombucha. Everybody wants to know how to make kombucha because it's the cool new thing on the block, right? Everybody likes kombucha. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of kombucha. It's a pain reliever. Isn't that interesting? Takes away joint pain. So it's a really good thing to use if you have pain. I had an interesting experience with this. I was doing a cleanse and this is a little bit TMI, but I'll share anyway. I was doing a colonic, and I didn't realize that it was going to kill me. And so I left the place, and I didn't think I was going to be able to drive home. I was in Orem. I was a little ways away. I called my husband. I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to drive home. I feel so terrible right now. And I made it 2 blocks to the Good Earth in Orem. And I went inside, and I got a kombucha, and I drank the entire bottle. And by the time the bottle was gone, I felt fine. I was on my way home. So it's okay, it actually works. It really does take away pain, and it did. It helped a ton. It helps to stabilize blood sugar. Now, I want to caution you a little bit. A lot of the commercial kombuchas have a lot of sugar in them. So be careful and watch that. You're going to want to get one that doesn't have a lot of added sugar because it does naturally stabilize blood sugar unless you go and do a whole bunch in your kombucha. Then it's not really going to help. Helps the liver in removing toxins. So if you're working on a cleanse, if you're working to get rid of stuff, this is a great thing to do. And it has probiotic yeast. This is one I always joke about. It treats diarrhea, even parasitic diarrhea. So basically, one of my survival tools, if the world comes to an end, is all of my kombucha scobies. Because this is going to help fight all the problems that come when the world comes to an end. But let's talk a little bit how to make the kombucha. So the first thing you're going to do is make a tea. Now, people always ask, can you use green tea, herbal tea? Does it have to be black tea? What kind of tea does it have to be? So I make it with a decaffeinated green tea. Does it work? Absolutely. People tell me all the time, oh, it won't work with that. Of course it works with that. It totally works with that. You can also use an herbal tea. I never know how to say it. Is it rooibos? If anyone knows how to say that better. Rooibos, something like that. Anyway, it works great with that kind of tea as well. So you make a tea. It's just the regular old kind of tea you're going to make. You're going to get water. I make a big pot of it. So typically I throw 8 to 10 tea bags in with a whole bunch of water. but just make the typical tea. Then you're going to add sugar. You do have to add sugar to the kombucha because you have to feed the bacteria. They have to have food in order to be able to do their business. You add sugar, and I think that I have a recipe on there to do. You add sugar, you add a little bit of the leftover kombucha, and a SCOBY. So a SCOBY is this slimy looking thing in there. Isn't it pretty? It's a culture of bacteria and yeast, and it's the thing that makes kombucha what it is. It's the thing that makes it slightly carbonated. It's the thing that's what makes it healthy, gives all of those healthy bacteria to the mixture. So that's what a SCOBY is. It's the exact same size as my jar because it turns whatever size of the jar you put it in. Isn't that crazy? So that's why it's this exact size. I can cut it in half and put it in another jar, and by the second batch or so, it'll be the size of that jar. So it'll change to whatever it's in, but that's the SCOBY. These also multiply rapidly. So if you need one of these, you can probably find a friend who has. This is what I call my SCOBY hotel. So I just have extras that live in here until somebody needs one, or until I have one that hasn't been used lately and I need another one. They just live forever. Yeah. They just live forever. I know. You need to keep feeding them. Yeah, you need to keep feeding them, or you put them in the freezer. Good question. So you either feed them or you put them in the freezer. If you put them in the freezer, it's like what they did to Han Solo. You know, they put them away for a little while. They need them again, they can unfreeze it, and they're good to go. So you can do that with all of these starters. Thank you for asking that. All of these cultures, you can do that exact same thing. You can throw it in the freezer if you're going to be gone for a little while. You're going to just not be able to deal with it for a little while. But honestly, most of my, people will say, oh, I killed my natural yeast starter. Oh, you got to work really hard to kill it. I mean, super hard. You know, you can usually revitalize these guys. You revitalize them with whatever they like to eat. So if it's kombucha, it likes sugar. So you're going to revitalize it with some sugar. It's just whatever they like to eat. Kefir yogurt also likes sugar. They're getting their sugar from the milk. Milk has a lot of sugar in it. That's where they're getting their sugar. That's why water kefir, you have to add sugar too, because water doesn't have sugar in it. So, but milk kefir, you're great, and yogurt kefir, you're great, because it already has sugar in the milk. Okay, so how often do you have to feed them? Depends on how often, like a pet? No. Very good question. So I have left my pets unfed for a month before, and it's fine. You've done it longer than I have as well. Yeah, so these pets are pretty resilient. They're going to live for really a long time, and they're going to be just fine. If you want them to be active and you're going to use them, I would say weekly. You know, put some new milk in there. Yes?
How do you tell when they're going bad? Do they start getting smaller or shriveled?
No, what happens is the stuff you put them in gets tartar and tartar. Like you want to eat it less. Yeah, it gets pretty dang strong. You can just tell. And then you're just going to feed them again, and then the new guys that you just fed, because they're going to have babies, and then the babies are going to be stronger and healthier again. So yeah, you'll notice.
So do you just keep them out, or can you put them in the fridge?
I put them in the fridge, yes, especially if it's going to be a while. So like the kefir, you put it out on the fridge or you put it out on the counter for just 24 hours. Then you're going to put it in the fridge until you decide you're going to use it again. Yep, exactly. Good question. I mean, the same with yogurt. You know, you're going to keep your yogurt in the fridge, and then you're going to pull it out and use it. Kombucha, that guy never goes in the fridge. So this one just lives above my oven. Melanie knows. She knows where my kombuchas live. It totally is. I mean, who wouldn't want to know what that was, you know? You wait till people ask, exactly. Okay, so let's go through a little bit of the process of kombucha. So you have your tea, you add the sugar in. I usually add it in the pan itself. Then I pour it into big jars. This is just because I'm making a lot of it. Okay, so I pour it into big jars with a SCOBY. I let it sit there for 4 to 5 days. It's going to turn into apple cider vinegar pretty dang quick. So you're not going to want to leave it for much longer than that. Otherwise, it gets pretty strong. At that point, you can drink it. You can drink it then, and that's great, but it's not going to be that fizzy, carbonated things like you get in the store if you do it then. It'll still be super healthy for you, and it still tastes fine, but you can make it better. Of course, you could add Everclear, which makes everything better. These are just my bottles, so I promise I didn't drink all of that. But what I do then is I pour the kombucha that's been going for about 4 days in there into here with some flavorings. And there's all sorts of delicious flavorings. I think I put my favorites on here. Couple of my favorites, blackberries and sage. Oh, so delicious. I could just go out to my garden, pick a couple sage leaves, pop them in here, some blackberries. Honey and vanilla bean, that one's really yummy. You know that. You put a vanilla bean in there, a little bit of honey, peach and raspberry, ginger and lemon. There's all sorts of different flavor combos. You put them in here, seal the lid. You're going to let this go for another 4 to 5 days as well. The other way you can do it is you can pour this directly into a bottle like this, and now it's in a drinkable version. We just make so much that I usually make it in this bottle and then pour it into these bottles to actually keep in the fridge. So I don't do any refrigeration of any of this until it gets to this point. But once it gets to this point, I don't want it to be any stronger, because the longer it sits, the stronger it gets, and it's going to taste just like vinegar. So once I get to this point and it's the drinkable place, or if it's straight out of this and it's the drinkable place, put it in the fridge, because it's going to get a lot stronger if you don't, unless you like it that way. But that's kombucha. Everybody likes kombucha now. Everybody's buying it at the store. It's like $3, $4, $5, $6 $6 a bottle, right? You can make this for pennies on the dollar if you make your own kombucha.
And if it does get too strong, you take a little bit of an orange peel or a lemon peel, put it in there.
It'll calm it down?
Yeah.
I didn't know this.
I've been able to change mine. If it's too strong, I'll add something into it. And
It'll calm it down. It'll tame it down. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because sometimes life gets a little away from you and you forget.
Same with your Kefir.
All of those things. You can calm them down.
Like an orange peel or a lemon peel.
I wonder what the peel does.
Well, that's where all the flavonoids are.
Yeah.
So you don't need the juice.
This makes me want to think about the chemical reaction. What is it doing to that ferment?
Well, it's giving it a little bit of sugar.
Interesting.
And then you're getting the flavor.
Interesting. Okay.
Strong enough to become alcoholic?
You will get a little zing. Yeah, you will get a little zing. And there is talk that the kombucha that's in the store sometimes has alcohol in it. Is it like you're drinking Everclear? No, but it gets a little burny if it stays in there too long. So what my husband does, he dilutes it out. He typically does half and half water or kombucha, or even a third kombucha with water, and just dilutes it out so it's not so strong. So, yep, that's an easy way to do it. No, because your body, you start slow, your body will tell you. He'll be like, no, I don't want any more of that right now, But you can't get too many good yeast. I mean, too many bacteria. Your body's going to keep you at balance. Once you get those good guys going, you're never going to get too many good guys. You can get too many bad guys, but you're not going to get too many good guys. But listen to your body. I mean, I don't know if any of you ever had that experience where you look at a kombucha in the store and, yesterday you thought, oh, that sounds so good. And you look at it today and you think, no, not today. It's just, you just kind of listen and going, yeah, okay, I get it. I don't need it today. Good question. Cultured vegetables. Okay, this is where people start to turn up their noses a little bit. So when you culture the vegetable, it increases the vitamin C and fills the vegetable with good probiotics. Literally, 1 spoonful of this provides billions of probiotics. So how much money do people spend on probiotics? A lot. And unfortunately, most of those probiotics are dehydrated, and they make it all the way out the other side before they even do a bit of good, before they even become activated. So this kind of probiotic is live. You're eating it in its live form. It's going to be really active immediately. The woman who wrote that book I had at the very beginning gives this to any child that's sick. A spoonful of the liquid from any of these, like this is some fermented dilly beans. So a spoonful of that liquid, you might have to do a little talking to get it down, but it actually just tastes salty. Just tastes kind of like salt water. I mean, it's really not that bad. I like it a lot, but kids, might need a little talking to do that. It knocks out stomach viruses, colds, and the flu. Just takes them out. So it's really amazing. Like I said, spoonful of juice every hour to fight stomach cramps and diarrhea. It's really amazing. And this is probably the easiest, I think, one of the easiest ferments actually to make. So let's talk through a little bit how we make them. This one, this is probably our family's very favorite. This is a fermented dilly bean. So all it is raw beans. So you don't cook them, you don't can them, you don't process them, you do nothing but break them up and put them in the jar. I've added some dill and some garlic and a couple other things. The reason the brine's such a funky color is that half of these beans were purple beans. And so it pulled the purple out of the bean into the water because I was like, oh, it kind of looks disgusting. But it's just because the beans were purple that I put in here. You then cover it with a brine. So it says on there, brine fermenting, basic brine for vegetables that are kind of dense like this, a gallon of water for a half a cup of salt. So that's all you do, is you pour it over the top. You make sure it's covered completely over. This one I probably could use a little more in. I usually pack them down, so sometimes they bounce back up again. And that's it. You let it sit on your counter for about 3 days, then you put it in your fridge. That's all you do. So how much easier is that than if anybody's ever canned beans? So much easier than canning beans, and they taste amazing. That's something that we have with salads all the time. We'll just pop them out on the counter, and people just add them to their salads.
You're leaving the lid off when you do that?
For
You're putting the lid on, or you're leaving it off on the counter for 3 days?
good question. So let's talk about that. Actually, I think.
You're using Jim's thing.
Actually, I don't use Jim's thing. I was given Jim's thing, so I have Jim's things to show. But I do if I want to get fancy, but I'll show you the other way. I think I'm getting ahead of myself, though. So let me go back to just one moment. So the purpose of pretty much what you're going to do when you're fermenting a vegetable is you're just adding salt to the vegetable. So what in the world are you doing? Why do you need to do that? So salt draws the juices out of the vegetable, and it creates that brine. So this one I've added a brine to. This one I did not add a brine to. If I just pushed on this just a little bit, I just pulled this straight out of the fridge. If I push this down a little bit, it would just fill with brine right above that. So it will pull that out of the brine, and then those good bacteria are under the brine. That's why you have to have it covered over like this. Especially while you're fermenting, and so we'll get to how we do that, how we keep it underneath that brine while we're fermenting, because the good bacteria don't like oxygen. The bad bacteria do. If you've ever done any canning, you know you're always worried about botulism, right? Botulism comes because oxygen is let into that bottle, so they are an oxygen-loving bacteria. As long as you're under the brine, you don't have to worry a thing about botulism or any of those bad guys. This is lactic acid bacteria. They're under the brine, and you're safe to have that. In fact, they're very, very healthy for you. The salt enhances the texture of the vegetable. It kind of makes them crisp, which is yummy. Those beans, I love them like that. They're crisper than the kind that you can. Increases the saltiness, basically. So it doesn't inhibit the good bacteria, but it does the bad. If you don't put enough in, the vegetables will rot. And actually, I have had some that did rot during the fermentation process. It was some tomatoes. And I don't think the salt was enough to get in there, and they got mushy and disgusting. So they got thrown away. What kind of salt to use? Don't use kosher salt. I don't know if you realize that kosher salt has an anti-caking thing on it, and you don't want that to get in there because it's going to mess with the brine and the fermenting. Do use a salt with higher mineral content. It will add minerals and enzymes. So the one I like to use is real salt. It actually puts a little bit of a, probably is in here, a little bit of a brown kind of haze at the bottom of your bottle because it's adding minerals, but it's good. That's what you want, is to add some minerals. Okay, so now we're getting to how we do this. So you put it in the bottle. Let's use this one first. You need to keep the vegetable below the level of the brine for at least the fermentation period. For this, it's going to be about 3 days. You can see my favorite method is the one on the upper left over there. It's a Ziploc bag full of water because it's cheap and it's easy and I can reuse it again. So all you do is put a little bit of water in that Ziploc bag. The weight of the water will weigh it down. The bag will actually seal off the edge of the bottle. See what I'm talking about? And now you don't get oxygen in there, and it's weighted down below the brine. That's my favorite way of doing it because it's cheap and easy and you don't need anything special. You can use this or multiple versions. I think I have 3 versions of this. What this does is you put the weight on top of the vegetable. So the weight goes here. If there was a vegetable in here, the weight would go there. This would go on top, and this pops in here. What it does is you want it to be able to vent. You want it to be able to off gas as it's fermenting. So this allows the gas to come up. You put a little bit of water in here. This allows the gas to come up, but it doesn't allow oxygen to get back down. So it's called a fermentation lead. These are, again, reusable multiple times. I've used this one a lot of times before. But I just don't have a lot of these. So most of the time it's just the nice handy-dandy Ziploc bag because it works. And I have lots of them. So that's what I use to weight it down. Now, it doesn't always work for everything because not everything can I fit a Ziploc bag in. Yep, because it still kind of escapes up around the corners, and you'll see them. You'll see it bubbling even during that fermentation time. This year I had a bumper crop of Napa cabbage. Napa cabbage is what you use to make kimchi. And so I took a whole day, cleaned all of it, and cut it up, and it filled whatever size cooler that is, that big of a cooler. It filled it, top to bottom. So then I had to figure out how the heck to turn that into kimchi, so then I had to weight it all down underneath the brine. Well, a plastic bag's not going to do that. So I had, I'm trying to remember what I got. I got Rubbermaid totes. I got Rubbermaid totes that were clean, could fit inside of that, and then I put plastic bags inside of that weighted it down. Does that make sense? Like, you're just trying to get creative. So that had to sit for overnight with kimchi, and then in the next morning what you would do with kimchi is and it shrunk by about 2/3 by about that point, because all the water gets pulled out of it, and it gets smaller, shrinks. And then with kimchi, you rub a paste all over it. And I don't have the recipe in here, I apologize. Maybe I'll have to email that out. You rub a paste of ginger and garlic and peppers all over the leaves. And then you leave this to ferment for a few days. Sauerkraut's easier. Kimchi's my favorite, so that's why I take the time to do it, but sauerkraut's easier. This is a real sauerkraut crock. And there's my weight. And this is a real sauerkraut pounder. So what you do when making sauerkraut is you cut up cabbage and you think, oh, I've got so much cabbage. No, you really, like when I first made it in this crock, I thought, I'm going to fill that whole crock. I had, 10 cabbages out of my garden. It filled like this much. It was so depressing. You put a little bit of cabbage in there, you sprinkle some salt on top, and then you start pounding. And I always do this on the floor because I can pound like this and I get a little more pressure. You pound until you see the water start to rise. Again, we've not put any water in there. It's just pulling the juices out of the cabbage. You put another layer of cabbage in there, sprinkle a little more salt, pound again. So if you don't have a crock and an antique cabbage sauerkraut pounder, what do you use? You use a bowl and anything that will pound without breaking. I know people who use a mason jar. I get nervous about that. I'm pounding enough. So I have a pestle that I use when I make Thai food. It works great because it's wooden. Just look in your drawer of like your spoons and spatulas and think, what could pound that's in there, Yes, what do you use?
So I don't do any of that.
Okay.
I cut up my cabbage, put the salt on it, let it sit all day.
Just let it sit.
It does it itself. Then
That's even less work.
Put it in my mason jars
and good to go. That's even less work. You don't even pound it.
In the jar.
Push it down below the brine. All right, that's even easier.
Yeah, the way I did was in the big ball like that. You just
Kneaded it. So it's just to get that salt into the...
It just goes down and down until it's
smash it in. So that's all you need to do is just get the salt into the tissue of the vegetable. That's it. So lots of different ways to do it. Yeah, this is my weight. This actually is kind of funny. I always like to bring it because my brother-in-law made it. He was super ingenious and made it for me. He had a screw handle. The acid from the sauerkraut ate through the screws. Handle came right off. Exactly. Now I just use it without the handle. And it actually works just fine. But that's the basis of a crock fermentation. So it has some examples of, there is something that I like to do for a primary follower though. So on a sauerkraut, I save the best leaves from the outside, and that's what I put down first in the crock. So what I would do when I make it in the crock is I leave it in here for a month, 2 months sometimes, and let it just ferment inside of this crock. But I'd cover the entire thing with a cabbage leaf, which seals it off a bit, and then put my weight. With this weight, I would still use Ziploc bags to put more weight on it. So Ziploc bags are pretty much, I don't know what we'll do if the world comes to an end and we don't have any more. It's going to be sad. So that's the primary follower. Secondary follower is the weight. You can use a plate. You can use, whatever you want on top of that. Traditionally, they used rocks, smooth river rocks that were clean. And that's what they used to weight them down. So lots of different things you can do to keep them under that brine. And that's all you need to do is just keep it under the level of the brine. Brine fermenting. So same thing. That's what you're going to do for a bean, for a cucumber, those sorts of vegetables. I love a true fermented cucumber. And you don't get them in a store. You don't ever get them in a store. It's a different flavor. Those things will keep for like 5 years in your fridge. It's crazy how long they'll keep. And one year, it was really funny. My boys, I didn't realize, but down in my basement, that's where they would go and play video games with their friends. And I don't have treats down there. And I didn't realize they were eating all the pickles out of the fridge that was in the basement. Like, okay, that's a good snack. I don't mind that, actually. Like, yeah, Mom, we really like those pickles. Good, I'm glad. Okay, I have a trick.
And I've done the grape leaves.
And no?
No, I don't know whatever. I've even asked Jim, and he's like, that's all I do. So I don't know. Do you have any ideas other than the grape leaves?
The other thing is it can't have big seeds. So sometimes I've not had as much success if I choose the wrong cucumber.
Well, I found that I'm trying to think. I made sweet pickles, and they turned out great. I don't know. I wondered. I haven't dared try it.
Try it again. And it may be that the brine's not strong enough.
Well, I used it to make another, because I used the brine then for others, because the brine was great. I thought, I'll throw out these mushy cucumbers, so I'm keeping the brine.
Actually, the brine's really good for you.
Yeah.
A lot of people now are drinking dill pickle juice as a electrolyte. Perfect. Yeah, perfect. But it may not have been strong enough for those cucumbers. So it may be that you need to up the salt in your brine just a little bit to preserve those pectins. But yeah, make sure you have the tan and the leaves. So the grape leaves has the tannins in it, will make it firmer. Just not a lot of seed in the pickle, because I have done some. I grew some lemon cucumbers, which are like those little round balls, cute little things. I tried to pickle those. They worked terribly because they just had too much seed. I think the salt has to be able to get from the outside all the way through it. So if they're large, I'll slice them too. I'll slice them long ways, just so that salt can get to the entire surface of the cucumber.
If I remember right, I did slice them.
You did slice them?
I wondered if I hadn't sliced them.
If they would have worked. I know. Who knows? Try it again.
How do you know if you're not going to see how big the seeds are? How do you know how big the seeds are? Until you open it.
Yeah, well, typically you've used another cucumber of that kind, so you see if it's this fat, this is probably what the seeds look like on the inside. But that's why they have those pickling cucumbers that are a lot smaller. So one year I made 2 huge crocks of cucumbers, and I went on KSL. So my favorite place, I didn't say this yet, my favorite place to get veggies for this is on KSL. If you're looking on there during growing season, you'll find people that are literally almost giving away excess produce. All summer long, you'll find people on KSL. And so I went on KSL. I got 2 huge bushel baskets of cucumbers for like $20. Made huge crocks of it, because the problem with cucumbers with me is we eat some of them. That's part of we like to eat them. So I don't ever get enough to make like a whole huge crock out of my garden very often. You can't really save them up because they don't last very long. So I like just going on KSL, getting a couple bushels of somebody's that they've grown naturally, in their backyard, whatever it might be. That's my favorite source for veggies. What have we done veggies? I've done salsa, which is amazing. Kind of crazy, but you can actually ferment salsa. It tastes like fresh salsa 6 months later sitting in the fridge. I've done beets. Beets actually work really nicely this way. I've done, like I said, tomatoes. Didn't love that. I've done zucchini. It was a little slimy. It was edible, but barely. Any of the hard vegetables. So garlic's probably my favorite thing to do. Love garlic, fermented garlic. It's the greatest to just throw in a recipe. I've also diced garlic and fermented that. That was delicious. I've done carrots. Those are all the things that I think are real successful. Just kind of think of things that are a little firmer. I don't know. I have a thing against mush. I tried to ferment eggplant. it just even the thought of it makes me just cringe.
The other thing you can do is take the starter, what you've got there, and say you buy a salsa, the little starter in it, let it sit on the counter and ferment.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't really use this one much, because usually I'm just doing this. This is a great product. Yeah, it's actually a starter culture that, like she said, you can add to just existing product. Will make it last longer. It's adding bacteria into what you're already doing, or you can use it the same way. I could have added this to this, but I just made a salt brine and it did its own thing. Where are these yeasts coming from? When you're doing a vegetable ferment, where are those, not yeast, sorry, where are the bacteria coming from? The food itself. Yeah, like if you're doing a cucumber, it's on the cucumber. It's the soil-borne microbes that are actually good for us that we're not getting in the grocery store because we all like our food to be clean. So we don't eat it anymore. So it's coming from the outside of those vegetables. It's coming from the air. I wash them, but I'm not the same. I don't do the same thing as a store does. You know, a store washes them and then waxes them and makes them all look pretty so that we want to buy them. Unfortunately, then there's nothing good on it anymore. Yeah. So you know, most of the time I actually don't wash the vegetables or fruit that comes out of my garden. People think I'm weird, like Stacy, who won't eat fruit that I bring. Sure, I have not washed it. I wish I probably haven't. But if it's out of my garden, I'm just like, I like those bugs. I want them. It's the bugs that get you. Oh. Yeah, we've had a few meals where we actually had bugs crawling across the food in the bowl.
When you wash your vegetables right out of your garden, it makes them so they don't last as long.
Because it kind of washes off on an egg it's called the bloom, you know, the thing that seals the egg, but similar thing, yeah. So we don't wash much of anything coming out of our garden. Okay, I didn't realize when I had this all done, and then all of a sudden I went, I didn't talk about bread at all. So just last minute added in some bread material. So let's talk about about grains, because that's another one that a lot of people want to know about, is how do we ferment grains? I would say it's been, maybe 5-6 years ago, my daughter was having a lot of stomach issues. She was young. She was, you know, in elementary school, probably 2nd or 3rd grade, and lots of digestive issues. And so I took her to a doctor, and he said, you know, I really think you probably ought to take her off gluten. And at that time, this whole gluten-free revolution was just starting, and I was annoyed by it because I thought, oh, this is just the latest fad. It's just the latest thing that everybody thinks they're cool and wants to be gluten-free. And so when he said that, again, I was annoyed. And I'm like, I don't want to go gluten-free, but I thought, oh, let's try it. Her stomach aches are bad enough. Let's give it a try. So we tried it, but you can't just take one kid off of it. You know, you kind of have to do the whole family. So I did the whole family. My stomach felt better than it had in 20 years. Then I was really annoyed because I thought, oh, fine. Okay, so I guess this is something that's a problem with me. That's a whole nother talk about why gluten problems have come up. Actually, there's a little talk about that in here. Not a lot, but a little. So that's why I switched to doing natural yeast bread, because what I found is that I can actually have natural yeast bread and I'm fine with it, where I'm not fine with the bread that isn't made with the natural yeast. So let's talk a little bit about why that might be. First of all, what is natural yeast? All the rest of these things we've been talking about are bacteria. This one's yeast. So where do they come from? They're everywhere. They're all in the air. And my mom's funny. She loves to make bread. In fact, she's a phenomenal bread maker. My grandma was a phenomenal bread maker. But they did it traditional. Well, not traditional. This is traditional. They did it the modern way. They used regular yeast. So my mom was so excited to tell me she's making sourdough bread now, and she made her own starter. So you can make your own starter with grains and water, and you just let it sit out for a long time, like 2 weeks. It's going to collect all the natural yeast, the wild yeast that are everywhere around you, and populate that grain and turn it into a starter. So that's why you cannot actually have real San Francisco sourdough bread unless you're in San Francisco, because the yeasts that are in San Francisco only live in San Francisco. So you can get a starter from them, but it's really not going to be, pretty soon it's going to be an American Fork, Utah sourdough bread, because it's the yeasts that grow here. There's different kinds of natural yeasts. Beer has one type of natural yeast. Bread has another type of natural yeast. There's a lot of them. Have you ever looked at a grape and seen that kind of that white coating? That's the yeast. That's what turns it into wine. So they coat a lot of the foods we eat. We just don't realize what we're looking at. So there's over 1,000 different varieties of wild yeast. And until the late 1800s, I think it's even actually into the 1900s, natural yeast was really the only way to make bread. I think it goes a little bit into even closer to 1930, 1940 area. Then commercial yeast became available. Commercial yeast was still slower. It wasn't the rapid rise yeast that I was raised, making bread on. It was still a little slower, but it was faster than this. And then in the 1980s, rapid rise yeast came into play. This is the part I think is super interesting. By the 1980s, rapid rise yeast started. which also accompanied a rise in celiac disease, gluten intolerance, acid reflux disease, diabetes, and wheat allergies. Isn't that interesting? They all went hand in hand at the same time. Why? What does that have to do with anything? So we are going to get into this a little bit right now. This is a talk I have about grains. Got to go back, and some of you may have already heard this talk before, so we'll do a short version. Every seed, whether it's a piece of wheat, whether it's a sunflower seed, whether it's a seed that I plant to grow a green bean, whatever kind of seed it is, it has a sprouting inhibitor on the outside of that seed. That sprouting inhibitor makes it so that whatever's on the inside of the seed doesn't sprout yet, because you don't want the seed to sprout until you put it in the ground and do what to it? What do you have to do to that seed to get it to grow? Water it. So the water washes off that sprouting inhibitor. So if you take that seed, which every piece of wheat is a seed, and you grind it up without doing anything else to it, you are also including the sprouting inhibitor in the grinding up of that seed. So now you have made whatever is inside that seed, that piece of wheat, not available to you either. So that there's this phytic acid that's in this seed, that's in the seed that you grind up, that makes it so that everything you eat with that piece of bread, or that bread as well, you're not getting the minerals that you need, the vitamins and minerals out of that food that you should. So before 1980, or even a little bit earlier than that, what would happen? Let's talk through how you make a natural yeast bread. You add this starter, which is just flour and water and yeasts. Now this is a Pleasant Grove, Utah sourdough bread starter because I live in Pleasant Grove, and so that's what has populated this yeast because I've been using it for a long time. So the yeast in here has pre-digested the gluten. All gluten is a big protein. It's just a big protein with a lot of amino acids chunked onto it. So the yeast breaks apart that protein into individual amino acids. When I add this yeast to flour to make a natural yeast bread, it's going to sit in there for upwards of 12 hours or longer before I make the bread, before I actually cook it. During that 12 hours time, that yeast is going to pre-digest all of the gluten in my bread and make it all absorbable by my system better than just a piece of wheat that's been ground up with that sprouting inhibitor all along with it. So before 1980s or so, when the rise had to be much longer, the bread was pre-digested, the gluten was pre-digested, and it also incorporated a lot of really healthy yeast into the bread. So now we take a piece of wheat, we grind it, we turn it into a piece of bread in 3 hours' time, right? You ever made bread? You can make bread in like an hour and a half, start to finish. So it doesn't have time to do any of those things. So now bread is full of this protein called gluten. Gliadin is there's a couple of big fancier names, but it's full of this protein that hasn't been broken apart. That protein hits our gut. Your gut oftentimes has a hard time breaking that protein apart. It's a big one, and then it goes through and your body says, I don't recognize what this is. I only recognize little tiny amino acids. I don't recognize this big old glob stuck together. Attack. Attack, attack, attack. I don't like that. I don't like that. That's where we get a gluten intolerance. It's not a true allergy. It's just an intolerance because your body says, I don't know what that is, and I don't like it. So then it builds up an immune response to it, and every time you eat it, you get a problem. I had the strangest thing, and I had a friend who was a doctor, and he's like, explain to me what happens. He was very interested. It was like early in the gluten-free revolution time. He said, explain to me what happens to you when you eat gluten. He said, when I eat gluten, my right eye hurts really bad. And he looked at me and he was like, oh. Yep, that's what happens. But I call this like my gluten detector, because as soon as it happens, and what I think it is I think I've just got like a low-grade yeast infection in this right sinus, like at all times. And as soon as I eat gluten with a yeast bread, all of a sudden it fills it and my eye hurts. My eye hurt terribly for like 3 years. I was doing drops all the time. I couldn't even hardly drive because if I held my eye open for too long, it hurt so bad. And I tried everything. I went to every doctor. Nobody could fix anything. As soon as I stopped eating bread, it all went away. Isn't that stupid? I mean, just who would think that your eye problem would be from gluten? But it's just the yeast and the gluten that your body doesn't recognize. The other thing is those strong yeasts in a rapid rise yeast bread also can sometimes, a lot of us are yeast heavy. We have too much yeast in our body just because it comes in the diets. It's in our diets, in our environments, everywhere. And so if we're eating a lot of those, even natural yeast, sometimes I can tell when I need to stop eating bread, even though it's really delicious. But the natural yeast bread has less of effect than those strong commercial yeasts. So that's the short version of why this stuff is all increased. It's just harder for our bodies to digest bread that hasn't been pre-digested by the yeasts in the starter. So how does it eat? How does it work? The starter is made, like I said, by fermenting some kind of yeast with flour and water. You can get a starter from a friend. Again, these multiply. There's always extra. You can buy it online. You can buy it. There's a lot of different places. You can get it at health food stores. Just get a starter. You're going to add that to flour and water. The first time you're going to use it, you're going to need it to set longer because it's been inactive. It's not super active right there. But you're just going to let it sit for a little longer, and you can tell it's working when it gets bubbly. See, this guy's been out of my fridge for about an hour and a half now, and it's starting to get bubbly. So it's active. It's happy. Those bubbles are actually, as it's eating what's in that flour and water right there, it's releasing the carbon dioxide, and that's what makes the bread rise. So when you're using a natural yeast starter, some people say, actually I have some question answers here at the end about why it didn't work. This is why it doesn't rise, is if you don't have a very active starter. So you need to make sure you actually have a pretty healthy starter. It's wet. It's not a powder. You can see that. They can be done whatever you want to them. You can add to them. I can make them giant. I taught a class once where I had a whole bunch that I gave away, and so I just kept feeding, made a whole bunch of starter. You can dry it. I have a little bit in my freezer just in case I ever kill this thing beyond recognition. I've got a little in there left. It just lasts forever. I heard a story that cowboys would keep them in an empty skull tin in their shirt pocket when they would sleep because it would keep it active because they loved those starters. They kept them healthy and they loved the bread made it for. So they'd keep it in their shirt pocket while they'd sleep at night to keep it warm and keep it going. By combining the yeast with flour and water, basically it creates an environment where those yeasts thrive. They love this nice wet environment like this. They feed on the simple sugars in the flour and break down things like gluten. So it's really a pretty amazing process. So why do you want to eat this bread? There are some really cool health benefits from these natural yeast bread. The natural yeast slows digestion to help you feel full longer. So it's a natural way to eat less. Isn't that interesting? It's a natural diet plan. Eat bread. Who knew? The acids that are produced during it lower the glycemic index of the bread. So you're eating bread, but you're not spiking your glycemic index the same way. And it lowers that response. This is the cool part. Actually, there's a study in 2009 showing that it lowers the response to all the food that you eat along with that bread. Isn't that cool? It'll affect even the meal hours later based on that yeast that's in the bread. So this is a pretty cool little thing. So I'm going to go through the recipe real fast. I realized when we're preparing this that I need to do a whole class on just natural yeast breads, but we'll run through super fast for you. So when you're making a sourdough bread, the very back page, you combine starter and it needs to be active starter. So we just have a system in my house. We feed the starter Saturday afternoon, and then my daughter makes the bread Saturday evening, and you'll see why, which then makes it so we bake it by Sunday afternoon. It's not harder, it's just planning. It's just you have to think ahead, plan ahead. It's no harder. In fact, you're going to see this is super easy. You combine so again, Saturday morning I fed my starter. I do. Yes. And what you're going to do, you can do one of two ways. You can do it by weight or you can do it by volume. So I like to add equal amounts. It's actually more accurate to do it by weight. So I use a kitchen scale primarily just because my daughter really likes the kitchen scale and it makes it cooler to make bread when you do it this way. But this is the way we do it. So I'll add, let's say I'll add 1.5 cups of flour, then I add 1.5 cups of water. Or if I add 200 grams of flour, then I add 200 grams of water. So it's just equal amounts, and I do that Saturday morning. So that, so you do it about 4 to 6 hours before you want to start making your bread because you want it to be all bubbly and happy by then. This hasn't been fed in.
I just asked you, do you keep that up?
Nope.
You put it in
Nope.
the refrigerator, so don't let it.
Not during that time. During that time, yes, I keep it out.
I'm saying just storage-wise.
I keep it in the fridge.
Okay.
Hmm.
Can I ask about the flour you put in there? Is that-
Yes. Good question. So there is a kind of, I knew somebody was going to ask this and I was not going to remember the name of it. There's a flour. That's a good one too. There is a white flour though that's it's a wheat flour, but it's a white wheat flour, and it's what they use. Has anyone ever eaten the Abigail's oven bread? You can get it like Good Earth. You can get it. It's my favorite if we don't make bread. Then that's what I go by. It's the wheat. It's the flour that they use. I will get it on an email. So will you remind me to do that? That flour. There was something else I said I needed to do also, and I don't remember what it was. I'll try. Oh, kimchi recipe. That was the other one. Yes. The simplest way is to use a white wheat flour. It's the easiest way to make it because it's the most predictable. So I always like to start people with that because you're gonna get you're gonna get a loaf of bread that looks like this. Like it's gonna be, Instagram worthy the very first time you make it. Okay, so then you don't get disappointed because sometimes you start using some of those other flours, einkorn, kamut, and it doesn't turn out quite this way for a few times until you start experimenting and get exact measurements and all those sorts of things. This is going to be a slam dunk out of the box. I actually have a really nice einkorn sandwich bread that I make that I love.
Well, the kamut, you can't tell the difference, and you don't have to do anything different like you do einkorn.
Except for it takes so stinking long to grind it in a wheat grinder. Because the grain's 3 times the size. I keep going out to my garage. It's still grinding? What in the world? But yeah.
So do you sprout yours first?
I don't. I just grind it. Grind it because you don't need to sprout it
Yeah, you don't
if you
need
do
to
this.
sprout it.
Yeah.
But I do both.
Yeah, that's good.
Make sure.
It's even better.
Do you have a stone ground wheat grinder?
I do, but the one I used to have heated up too much, especially with the kamut, because it just took so long. And I thought, is it killing all the enzymes by the time it grinds this stuff up,
What kind was it? Was it the magic mill type thing?
It was a tall one with a stone that went around like this. I can't remember the name of it. It's an older type. Now I have, I've heard mock mill is a very good one, MOCK, and I just got a new one, and I try and remember. It's not a mock mill, but the mock mill is very good. I think it might be a magic mill. I think it's just the newer version of a magic mill, and it is a stone ground. It is a stone ground mill. But I worry about the heat. So I put some in, and I kind of let it chill a little, and then I put a little bit more in, especially with a hard to grind wheat like kamut. It just takes longer. It's just a harder wheat to grind. I think it's just a bigger grain. So.
Years ago, that wheat where they grow wheat has been changed. The original form. I mean, so that could cause some of these.
Absolutely. Not only just where they grow it, like the ground they grow it in, but the actual wheat itself. As they hybridize it, so wheat is an interesting seed. It's called a diploid, so it has basically two forms of genes, but every time they hybridize it, it doubles it. And then it doubles it again, and then it doubles it again. So it's really almost unrecognizable from the start. So the einkorn is the closest, it's the oldest kind that's really available is einkorn. It's pricey. EINKORN.
Well, kamut was the original that they started modifying.
So kamut is a really good one too. Kamut, einkorn, and spelt are kind of the 3 that are usable, that are a little bit better and easier on you than.
So what do you have in your basement that you just?
That's exactly what I was just gonna say. You know what? But no, because if you put it through this, it's gonna be better. It's gonna be better. Yeah. And so this again is an end of the world thing too. We're gonna have kombucha. We're gonna have natural yeast bread because it's gonna help us make all of that good food storage that we've spent a lot of money and time, moving from house to house to house. It's gonna make it edible for us. So let's finish this. So starter, flour, water, salt. All you're gonna do is mix it together. So I put it in a big bowl and I use a spoon. That's all I do. You don't even need a mixer. Let it rest. Let it sit there for 60 minutes or 30 minutes. It's gonna look a little hairy. If you've ever made it, you know what I'm talking about. Like, the flour doesn't totally incorporate in. You're just gonna let it sit there for 30 minutes. Then you're gonna add, I actually add the salt at the very beginning, so I guess I'd even cheat. You can add salt at that point if you wanna be fancy. Then you're gonna fold the dough. So all you're gonna do is you're gonna reach one side of your dough, you're gonna pull it over this way. You're gonna turn your bowl quarter turn, you're gonna reach this side of the dough, pull it over this way, turn to quarter turn, pull it over this way until you've pulled over 4 times. Does that make sense? That's it. Then you're gonna leave it alone. Every 30 minutes, you're gonna do that same thing. You're going to fold, turn, fold, turn, fold, turn. No kneading, no nothing. I mean, is this not fabulous? This is why my daughter makes it. So usually it's because I tell her you can watch a movie while you make bread, because that's 2 hours. And as long as she folds the dough 4 times, she can watch a movie. So she's like, can I make bread tonight? I'm like, sure. We all win this way. So watch a movie every 30 minutes, go and fold your bread. Then you're going to put it in the fridge. You don't have to do this step, but this is the way to get this longer ferment time. So you're going to put it in the fridge, cover tightly for 12 hours. Just put it overnight. So again, Saturday night, we just put it in the fridge. Sunday morning, we wake up, we take the bowl out of the fridge, we set it on the counter. We leave it there for a couple hours while it starts to get warmed up again. Then we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to pull that dough out. We're going to fold it, fold it, fold it, fold it. Then we're going to turn it over again, fold it, fold it, fold it, fold it, and you're just shaping it. You're going to put it in whatever you want. This is called a banneton. I have a couple of different versions of them. This is what makes the Instagram bread. If you care that it looks like that, this is what it is. It's this little wicker thing. You can get it on Amazon. And you sprinkle a little bit of, I use rice flour. All this was me. I ground up some rice in a blender, and it now is rice flour. So sprinkle the rice flour inside of the banneton just a little bit. So you've made your loaf. You've tucked underneath all your things. You flip it over so the ugly side's up, and you let it raise. You're going to let that raise for 2 to 3 hours. In my oven, I have a proof cycle, or proof thing, where I push a button that says proof start, and it just turns it into some magical bread raising place. If you don't have that, you can just stick it in that oven with the light on again. It's a great way to do it. It'll raise typically about the height of this if you do it in a banneton. More often than not, I don't care about Instagram. I just make it in a bread pan because my family wants it as a slice of bread and a toast in the morning. This looks cool and it's yummy, but more often than not, we throw it into a bread pan. So we just raise it in the bread pan. So you'll see the 2 different versions of it. If you're using a Dutch oven, if you want it to look like this, you're going to heat up your oven and the pan in the oven with it. Does that make sense? So by the time you add your bread, your pan is smoking hot. Sometimes it is smoking hot. You're going to score the loaf. Does anyone know why you score a loaf of bread? Why you make these little slits in it? It's not just to make it look cuter. Because it's going to expand, and you're controlling the expansion where you want it to expand. And it does make it look cuter. So you cut it whatever way. A lot of times I'll just cut it one straight line down the middle. Sometimes if I want to get fancy, I'll do a couple cross ones, or you do whatever you want. It's just controlling the expansion. Otherwise, a lot of times it'll crack right along the edge of the pan. On a bread pan, it'll just crack there and it looks uglier. So this way you're just expanding, you're just controlling the expansion. So you're going to score it, place it in that hot pan, and then it has the instructions for baking. And I didn't bring it, I forgot to bring it. Or if you're using a bread pan, just throw the pan in the oven. Like I said, that's the thing I do most often. You need to test the temperature of the bread. This is an absolute, I think. So you can go onto Amazon and buy a digital thermometer. It doesn't even have to be digital forever. I didn't even have a digital one. I just had one that, went up. But it's one of those ones that you stick in meat, or do you know what I'm talking about? It has like a little pokey end on it. It just has a little thing on. So when the bread, you've cooked it to what it says, pop that in. It needs to get up to 200. If it's at 198, close that oven up, put it on for another 3-4 minutes, because you're going to have you ever had that doughy inside of a bread and you just feel so sad? Because my heavens, you did this. You just went through like 18 hours of work to get a doughy loaf of bread. So pop that thermometer in there, and all my kids know, because half the time I'm not even home when it comes out of the oven. I'm like, check the bread. I know, Mom, I know. Poke that thing in. That's right. So poke the thing in. If it doesn't go up to 200, close it, put it on for another 3-4 minutes. I typically find in my oven, every oven's a little different. I typically find I always have to add like an extra 5 minutes to every recipe that I find. But that's just my oven. So I think it probably cooks a little low. So I live and die by that thermometer. So if I were to pick anything like out of the scale, out of these, it's the thermometer. That's the one thing to get to make some really good bread. So I have a couple of Q&A on here that I anticipated might come up. Look at that. Number 1, what kind of flour do I use? How long does it need to rise? To really pre-digest that gluten, it needs to rise for 6 to 8 hours. Sometimes I won't put it in the fridge. I'll make it in the morning. I'll try to have it cooked by dinner. You can do that, but it needs that good 6 to 8 hours. Is it sour? Most people have no clue that they're eating sourdough bread when they're eating my bread. They have no idea it's sourdough because it's not sour. It's just tastes good. Can you eat it?
Really quick on that.
Yes.
If you way more sour.
Yes.
It gets this kind of clear thing on the top. But it's
That's one of the questions.
really fresh. It's actually delicious. It's so good. It's not
Yeah,
sour.
it's not sour at all. Yeah, that's one of the questions. What's the brown liquid on the top? Yeah, the brown liquid on the top is actually hooch. It's actually alcohol. So you can drink it if you want. Or I typically pour that off, and then sometimes I'll even get rid of the very top surface of the starter, and then I'll really feed it. Actually, that's a lie. I used to really feed it. What I've learned now is the less starter you use and the more flour and water you use, the sweeter you can make that starter. So what I would do, let's say I had this sitting in the fridge for 3 weeks and it has a brown, scuzz on the top. I pour off the brown stuff. I need to tell you how I use it. I would use 3/4 of this, and I would only feed a tiny little bit. I would only feed this little bit. And then I would put flour, water, and I would feed it, because that way I'm still getting the yeasts in there, but I'm diluting the yeasts out. Does that make sense? Like, it's going to make it less sour. So typically what I would do Saturday morning, Saturday morning, I'll take 3/4 of this out. I add it to eggs and a little bit of salt and whatever milk is in my fridge. It's usually an almond milk, coconut milk, something. Blend it up, and that's now German pancake batter. The most delicious German pancakes you've ever had in your life. The other thing I've done is, again, take 3/4 of this. You can add an egg. I'll add some garlic powder, maybe some just dried parsley, something like that. You pour it out. It's a little thick, so you kind of have to stretch it out on your griddle, and it's perfect flatbread. You just cook it right there, flip it over, you got perfect flatbread. People are like, oh, where did you get this flatbread? Oh, it's just some naturally wild yeast from my fridge. But you don't have to add any flour to it. So if you add flour, then you have to let it ferment. Does that make sense? So all of these things I'm not adding flour to. I'm using this as the flour. I'm using this as the flour in whatever recipe. Or Friday night, I'll pull 3/4 of this out. I will add flour to it, plus a little bit of sugar, like a teaspoon is all. Let it sit overnight. So now I've fermented that flour, and then the next morning I add an egg, I add a little bit of milk, and that's now pancake batter. Delicious pancake batter. So I use this extra bit in something super yummy. And then I add the starter or the flour and the water to this bit to build up the starter again for now the bread. Does that make sense?
You do that instead of dumping it out.
Yeah. Use it as flour in the recipe. Literally, in fact,
Have you done it like with cookies and literally use that as your...
I usually do it more as the flatbread, the waffle, the pancake, the something like that. German pancakes. It's usually breakfast time, because that's when I'm doing it on a weekend, which is when I cook breakfast, But I bet you probably could. Yeah, she has some good stuff, doesn't she? Yeah. I made these German pancakes a couple weekends ago, and my college kids brought all their friends home to eat, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is the best breakfast we've ever had, and I never tell them the secret. I will not divulge the secret. We already answered, can you eat it if you're gluten intolerant or celiac? Some can, some can't. It's how intolerant you are. Some celiac are completely fine with this, which I think it's probably worth a try. What if I killed my starter? I have so many people say this, I killed my starter. I'm like, you cannot kill it unless you dump it down the garbage disposal. I think that's the only thing that you can do. You can revitalize this. Brown liquid on the top, we already said what that is. And what if it doesn't raise too much? It's probably not a very active starter. Feed it again, use a little bit, feed it again, use it a little bit, kind of revitalize it, and then use it for bread. But yeah, that starter has so many yummy, wonderful pancakes and waffles and all sorts of things that you can use. So don't get rid of that. That's great stuff. And I think that's it.